Carolina versus Atlanta on Saturday. I'm gonna go with Atlanta, but man, like the records of these teams, you would expect them to be flipped if anything.
Yeah.
Carolina enters with a 2-0 record. Atlanta went 0-2 in Week 1. Did not look nearly as good as anyone would expect out of consistently the best regular season team in the CDL. One of the contenders for the world championship every single year. They did not look like that in the first week. Granted, small sample size again, but it was a little disappointing, a little shocking. Carolina looked better than I thought they would. I did not have high hopes for them, but they looked pretty strong, all things considered, in those first two matches. I still think the talent gap is quite large between these two teams. But maybe this is a slasher revenge game, and he's
I was
able
just
to
gonna say.
he's going to pull off an upset. So are you going with Carolina and Slasher to pull off the upset here?
Nope, I'm going with Atlanta to pick up their first win. I said it last week when we were kind of talking about Atlanta's 0-2 start, and you posed the question like, "Are you worried?" etc. And I was like, "No, not really." I mean, tough two matches to start for Atlanta, but if you look at their schedule, the rest of these online qualifiers here, there's a very realistic opportunity for them to just run the table now after this and win the next five and finish 5-2. But it all starts with this one, and again, kind of like you said, like you saw a 2-0 team versus 0-2 team for Atlanta versus Carolina, you might think the records would be the other way around, but that's not the world we live in right now. And
True.
Carolina has the momentum, so it's sort of like we got to see that. My thing with this match is can Carolina beat the quote unquote top teams, or the teams that are on paper you would expect them to have a tougher time with. And then for Atlanta, it's sort of like you know how do you respond to? I mean, I don't know for sure, but there's just a small possibility that's the first 0-2 week for like the Simpa Beasy duo or the Simpa Beasy Celium trio. Like, there's a very real chance that that's possible. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if it's true, but I just based on their success in these qualifiers in the past couple of years, I can't think of very many chances where they would have went 0-2. Um, Regardless of whether that is the case or not. It's the case right now. They went 0-2 in the first two matches. So how do they respond? How do they bounce back? Um, they got the opportunity here to play a team that, I mean, even if you look at LA Thieves, like you thinking of just the competitive mindset of those guys on that FaZe team, they go into any match thinking they can beat anybody, right? That's just like the type of players they are and the type of players they've been, and they deserve to have that mindset just based on their success individually and just in general in the CDL. But that you got to think if they're going to be championship contenders like a lot of people expect this year, they got to have that killer mentality and be like, all right, we're going in and we're trying to just 100-point club, map one, 6-0 search, 3-0 control, make it a
Mm-hmm.
30-minute series, see you later. And if Carolina puts up a fight, like, that's possibly a sign that Carolina is just better than some people anticipated. But it's just, again, another opportunity for us to see early on what both of these squads are capable of. But it's definitely a match that I expect Atlanta to win. And if Atlanta loses either of its matches this week, my place on like a worry meter is definitely creeping less from zero towards the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, and I think you kind of mentioned it with Carolina, and um, if they're able to beat some of these top teams or who we think are some of the top teams, and Atlanta would be in that consideration. That was kind of their issue last year is they could not beat those top teams, and a lot of teams couldn't. So it's not really a Carolina exclusive issue. But the Ravens essentially just beat up on some of those worst teams in the league, like the Boston Breaches of the world, but couldn't really consistently put it together against even teams like LAT, and certainly not Atlanta, New York, and Optic and FaZe and all that. So it's one of those things where if they're able to pick up this kind of win, and maybe that shows that they're going to be able to semi consistently beat teams that we consider to be in the top half of the league, that really helps their case for champs and moving forward and being what we consider is like maybe not contenders, but like a contenders light, a team that could sneak into the top three very easily just by the nature of the tournaments. The thing about this is it does feel early because it is early to talk about some of this stuff. But after this week, these teams will be halfway through the qualifier stage, or more than halfway, because we're playing 7 qualifier matches. Each team will, I think, have played 4 after this week. So, this is a good chunk of what we've seen of this team. Granted, it is not a big sample size. We don't really get a lot to see or base our opinions on these teams as we kind of get into the new year, but that's just kind of how it is, and it makes it fun. We're a little more tempered with our reactions, I think, as we go forward in the season, and once we get to like March, April, we know generally what some of these teams are at that point. We have no idea what a lot of these teams are right now, and that makes it, I think, pretty fun. Next matchup, Atlanta versus Vegas. I think that's kind of the perfect example of that. Like, what are these teams? We're still trying to figure out if Vegas can be, can beat a CDL team, like where they kind of can fit into the Call of Duty League. And Atlanta, we're trying to see, especially if they were to lose to Carolina on Saturday, going into this match, that makes this match even bigger, simply because, like, if they lost to Vegas, like you said, your panic meter or whatever would, certainly be inching closer and closer to full-on panic, I would imagine. So I'm gonna go with FaZe here, but man, like
I really, you said the there. I really thought you were gonna say I'm going with the Falcons.
The FaZe. I don't think anyone should pick Vegas Falcons, but crazier things probably have happened in Call of Duty, but this would be one of the craziest things.
It would, but I mean, we literally are less than a week away from Optic losing to Boston, and there are people who would say that would be one of the crazier things to expect, just based on where the teams ended last year. But jokes aside, I will say we saw this exact matchup at the Esports World Cup between FaZe, and they were just Falcons before the Vegas merger, and it was a 3-0 for Atlanta. We'll say most of the matches except the Control, I believe, were relatively close, definitely closer than some people were expecting, and that was our first taste of this Vegas Falcons roster back then, or I should just say the Falcons roster before they went to Vegas. That was really most people in the CDL world, their first taste of what this squad is capable of, and it was like, whoa, I mean, again, it's not like they got 10-point clubbed like some team against Complexity back at like COD Champs 2012 or whatever it was. They at least it was relatively competitive from the Falcons back at Esports World Cup against FaZe. I still expect FaZe to win this one, regardless of everything that regardless of the 0-2 start and regardless of what happened in the Carolina matchup. And like you said, if the Falcons are able to pull off an upset here, it would definitely be a massive talking point for us on the next show. But give me FaZe here.
Yeah, so just to kind of give a little context on that Esports World Cup match, FaZe, like you mentioned, won 3-0. The hard point was 250-175. The Search and Destroy was 6-3, and the Control was 3-0. I mean, it's like a decent, like it's obviously a sweep, but it's not like the most convincing or most lopsided sweep I've ever seen. So that's kind of the. I am grading the Falcons on a curve, and I'm grading FaZe on a curve as well, like on the opposite direction generally. But I don't know, like there's just no way that Atlanta should lose to Vegas, but if they look like week 1 FaZe, then it is a possibility. Not even a good possibility, but it is a possibility, and that's something that we have to kind of prepare ourselves for, I guess.